Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 20th of July of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. To tell the truth, the updates that we received today during the day was not just very interesting but also very complicated. I'm trying to say that it was very difficult to understand and to determine what exactly is going on at the combat line, because both sides, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, published a lot of information, provided us a lot of piece of information, and today we will try to understand what is exactly is going on and what is going to be the next steps of the parties of this conflict. First of all, we're going to start with the Black Sea. As we discussed, there is a small sea jam on the south of Odessa area, and basically, as you know, the insurance companies all over the world refused to sign the contracts with the cargoes, with the ships that goes in direction of Black Sea, because of very high risk that this or that ship will be destroyed by the Russian fleet. But today, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine announced a very interesting piece of information. Today, the Ukrainians reported that starting of 5 a.m. of the local time on the 20th of July, they will consider every single ship that goes in direction of Russian Federation as a ship that has a military weapon on board, and that this weapon is the Russians are going to use this weapon in the special military operation against the Ukrainians. So basically, according to the legal side of the situation, the Russians have already created a blockade of Odessa port, not just in a legal way, but also in the military way as well. We know that during the previous days, the Russians made a massive missile attack against those settlements on the south of Ukraine, against Odessa, Yuzhny, and many other towns. There were a lot of video of explosions. So basically, the Russians have established physical and legal blockade of Ukraine. And the Ukrainians just announced about legal blockade. So basically, this report means that currently the Ukrainians have legal power to attack every single ship that goes in the direction of Russian Federation. The purpose of this action is not to attack the Russian ships, because everybody understands that basically and probably the Ukrainians don't have such a weapon to attack the ships, and if the Ukrainians attack the Russian ships, for these purposes they will use, of course, the drones, navy drones that will be sent to them by United Kingdom or United States of America. And I don't think that United Kingdom wants to show their drones and want to have the titles in the newspapers that United Kingdom drones under control of Ukrainians destroyed civilian ships. I don't think so. The main purpose of the Ukrainians is the same as the Russian purpose, is to force the insurance companies all over the world to stop signing agreements and insurance contracts with Russia. So this is the main purpose, to reduce the number of insurance companies who can make these contracts, and this is going to be enough. The Ukrainians don't need to attack ships. Maybe there are going to be few cases to show the world and the insurance companies that Ukrainians can do this, can afford them. And as soon as one case happens, of course, the insurance, the payment, the bill for insurance will be increased, and of course, nobody will, in this case, go in direction of Russian ports. So that was the purpose. Now we're moving to the ground. During the previous night, the Russians made massive missile attack against Odessa region and Nikolaev, and today the Ukrainian sources published, and the Western sources and Russian sources published the photos of the results of those attacks. As you can see, a lot of buildings were damaged. The author of these videos, of these photos, claims that this situation took place in Odessa area. When talking about Kherson area or Kherson front line, there were no changes during the day. Both sides, either the Russians and the Ukrainians, were bombing each other with artillery, and of course there were very fierce fightings between the islands with boats and very fierce fightings with drones, but we haven't received any video or photo confirmations of those clashes. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings among the islands, as a result of artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost 45 soldiers and 4 armored vehicles. We finished with this combat line. Let's move to Orekhov bridgehead, and we are going to start with Kamyansky area. Today we got a lot of very interesting updates. The Russians, for example, reported without any evidence, without any video or photo confirmations, that as a result of a storming attempt, the forces of Storm Z Squad managed to develop their bridgehead and managed to advance for another 500 meters in direction in the vicinity of Kamyanska settlement. So according to this update, as I understand, the Russians started movements in this direction. But I don't think that this is a real offensive operation. I'm not sure that that was even Reco in combat. Probably the Russians tried to maintain the gray zone and just to understand the Ukrainian plans, because during the previous weeks, the Ukrainians haven't made even a single attempt to attack Russian positions. There was a small operational pause. The Ukrainians were making some kind of regrouping. So basically, the Russians maintained the gray zone just with one purpose: to understand the Ukrainian plans and probably to force the Ukrainians to start some actions, because the Russians, they need to know and they need to understand the upcoming Ukrainian plans, because for sure the Russians understand that this area is a primary area for the Ukrainians, and sooner or later they're going to start their offense, another attempt of offensive operation. Also, the Russians published just another video of small clashes, probably artillery duels in the area between Petykhatki and Nestyryanka. On this video we see how the Ukrainians reconnaissance team of Ukrainians were withdrawing their positions or were returning back from mission, and after that the Russians managed to discover this is a pretty nice well prepared artillery position for the Russians, and it didn't take much time and much experience from the Russian side to start attacking the Ukrainians while crossing this forest line. And as a result of that attack, as you can see, the Russians managed to destroy a small ammo depot in the forest lines. Now we are moving to the Bradley Square. The Ukrainians continued developing of their bridgehead in this area. All these days, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack the Russian positions, mainly those were reconnaissance in combat and probably reconnaissance in force. There were no real attempts from the Ukrainian side to penetrate the Russians' defense belt. The Ukrainians were completely focused on developing the bridgehead that they managed to establish control over and on the mining process. For example, today we just got 2 videos from this area, how the Ukrainians were implementing the process of demining. So they were moving with demining tanks among the forest lines, trying to destroy the mines. Just they were preparing the bridgehead before the next wave of attack. The Ukrainians need to be 100% sure that during the next wave of attack they will, because currently the Ukrainians don't have possibilities to accumulate a lot of forces among these fields, because if they accumulate a lot of tanks, they will be destroyed by Russian artillery system, Russian helicopters, Russian anti-tank forces, troopers, and so on. The only thing that Ukrainians can do, they can accumulate all their forces in Orekhov and Mala Takmachka on this line, let's assume, and when time comes, they will send all these iron horde to the south. So for this purpose, they will use the broad frontline attack. They will attack starting, let's say, from Novoandreevka to Mala Takmachka, hundreds of armored vehicles, and the Ukrainians need to be 100% sure that on the way of attack of those forces there would be no mines. So basically, currently the Ukrainians are trying to demine this area. We got another video from this territory how the Ukrainians Ur-77 was implementing another demining process among these fields. Of course, the Russians understand the Ukrainian purposes. Of course, it's highly unlikely the Ukrainians can do all this situation without infantry support. All these fields, all these forest lines are full of Ukrainian infantry, Ukrainian troopers who try to hold and try to repel possible Russian counter-offensive operations, but the Russians are not counter-attacking and they try to use and manipulate just with artillery systems. A very difficult situation with the Ukrainians we can see on the western flank of this main supply road, and the Ukrainians are trying to develop, but for now they were less success on the western flank in comparison with the eastern one. Now we are moving further to Avdiivka tactical bridgehead. Today we haven't received a lot of updates as well. Just a few updates, just few videos, geolocated videos that confirm the episodes of the previous clashes on this bridgehead. For example, in this video we see how the Ukrainian's tank was damaged and then the tank went into the lake, and on this part of the front line we see how the Russians were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions among the forest lines, probably trying to get the Ukrainian local ammo depots that the Ukrainian troopers were using just for clashes on the combat line. No updates on this area. Now we are moving to Ugledar, the first interesting area that I believe we need to pay attention to and discuss. First of all, today the Ukrainians, for some reason, or probably these days, maybe yesterday, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians made very interesting and, to tell the truth, a very surprised offensive operation. Not surprised because it was like hidden attack or something like this. From my understanding, that was a stupid attack from the Ukrainian forces. They collected convoys of armored vehicles among the fields, among mine fields, and tried to make something, to implement something. They were discovered by the Russian drones, by the Russian reconnaissance teams, and after artillery strikes, that Iron Convoy, Iron Forces, Iron Fist of Ukrainian forces was completely destroyed. Later at this video we got somewhere at noontime, and later somewhere at 6 p.m. of the local time we got the biggest, the longest version of that battle. The Russian, as you can see, the Russian intelligence reconnaissance drones were flying above this territory. They were controlling this territory for 100%. At some point of time, they managed to discover the Ukrainians' armored vehicles moving along the fields. After that, there was a call for artillery systems, and later the Russian artillery system just reduced everything till ruins and reduced and destroyed everything among the fields as a result of very fierce artillery fire. As I understand, as I have calculated, around up to 6-7 armored vehicles, including tanks, were destroyed during that failed attempt from the Ukrainian side to attack Russian position. Probably the only reason of that attack was the reconnaissance in force, and the Ukrainians were trying to understand and were trying to calculate the timings of the Russian forces on this bridgehead, and the most important, probably they were trying to track and discover the Russian artillery positions. As I understand, currently there is artillery duels, and the Ukrainians just try to destroy the Russian artillery systems that were involved in that, let's say, defeat process of Ukrainian reconnaissance in force. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of fierce fightings on the area between Petykhatki to Ugledar, the Ukrainians lost 170 soldiers, 11 armored vehicles, including 6 tanks, and probably those were the 6 tanks that were defeated and destroyed on Ugledar front line, and 2 artillery systems. We're finished with the south area, and now we are going to Donetsk and to the second, I believe, the most interesting combat during the previous days, and I'm talking about the Russian attempt to attack Krasnogorovka from the south, and we are going to continue our discussion, the battle of coal mine in this area. Today the Russians stopped publishing any videos, any geolocations from this area at all. There were no updates from the Russian side, but the Ukrainians from their side published a lot of videos, and for example in this video we see how the Ukrainians were trying to attack the Russians, their positions among this area, among these ruins, and on this video we see how Ukrainian FVP drone attacked the Russian, probably the door or entrance inside of Russian underground fortifications. Another video we got how the Russians were sending some reinforcements to that area, and the Ukrainians were bombing this territory, this road with grenades. Okay, this is very interesting, and as we discussed, if you remember, I told you that the Russians don't have much time on this bridgehead. Currently, we still haven't received any updates that the Ukrainians were able to return back control over this coal mine, but it doesn't mean that the Russians are able to hold this bridgehead endless. And as we discussed, the only purpose, the only goal that the Russians needed to implement as soon as they establish control over this coal mine is to create a safe supply road. And it's better to create a very long network of trenches that goes from the Russian positions inside of Donetsk and in direction of this coal mine. This is the only this is the only thing that can save or at least reduce the losses of the Russians, first of all, and the second, reduce the Ukrainian chances to counterattack and recapture these positions. And as we discussed, I told you that the only thing that I was not afraid of, but as I understand that everybody were expected when the Ukrainians would launch their counteroffensive operation. And the sources on the ground reported that at 2 a.m. of the local time this night, the past night, we can say the Ukrainians, to be more precise, the 79th Air Assault Brigade launched a counteroffensive operation. The Ukrainians started their movements in the direction of the coal mine. And we need to understand one thing about this coal mine. As you can see, this is a very small stronghold, and basically the most of the stronghold of this coal mine was reduced till ruins during the previous battles, during the previous clashes in this area and so on. So what does it mean? That means that there are not many square meters that the Russians can use for hiding purposes. So that means that there are very limited in the number of forces that they can keep in this stronghold. And this is not just the Russians' problem. The same problem, the Ukrainians faced the same problem while they were controlling this stronghold. And that means that every time when the Russians see another wave of Ukrainian counterattack in this direction, they need to call for reinforcement. Because I believe that maybe there are 12 or up to 20 soldiers on this bridgehead. And if they see that Ukrainians using, let's say, 100 soldiers under support of armored vehicles attacks in this direction, the Russians understand that they don't have enough of power, manpower, enough of resources to hold this bridgehead. And of course, for these purposes, they need to call for the reinforcement. And basically, we see that the settlement, the town, is located not very far from this stronghold. So basically, the Russians need maybe 30-15 minutes for the reinforcements to be arrived, and this is enough of time to hold for a while the Ukrainian offensive forces, and as soon as reserves arrive, they can defeat and so on. But the Ukrainians are also a part of the conflict, and they also develop their tactics, develop their experience, and so on. And what did happen today? The Ukrainians launched significant counteroffensive operation with the 79th Air Assault Brigade that gained and got a lot of experience in Marinka that haven't been captured yet by the Russians. And the Russian forces in the stronghold called for reinforcement. And the Russians from Donetsk sent a platoon or squad of reinforcements in direction of that stronghold. And as I told you, during the previous days, the Russians haven't managed to establish a safe supply road, and that was the reason of a trap, of an ambush. The Ukrainians created an ambush. During the night, when they saw the Russian forces crossing this area, this geolocated area, they basically attacked this area first with regular mortars. You see this in video, attack of mortar just at the beginning. This was a few soldiers was killed immediately or wounded, and after that the Ukrainians cleared this territory using the cluster shells, and that's it. And that was the reason of a very big failure and a very big heavy losses from the Russian side during the, let's say, reinforcement operation. And this is the problem. As I understand, the Ukrainians, as soon as they got what they wanted, and they understood about the Russian tactics of reserves and so on, as soon as the Ukrainians understood that they managed to implement successfully the ambush, they turned back and stepped back in direction of Krasnogorovka. So this is the tactic. So every single time the Ukrainians will launch attack, when they see that reserves are coming, they will make an ambush and they will step back, and they will try to implement this tactic all over the time until the Russians will take a decision to step back from these positions. The situation is very critical. For now, this is my opinion of the situation, this is my vision. I'm not saying that I'm 100% correct, but the facts, geolocated video, and many other things tells me that this is exactly what is happening on this bridgehead during the battle of this stronghold. Furthermore, today we got an update that one of the soldiers from the Russian sources, Misha, he is the administrator of the Telegram channel Misha on Donbas. He provided a lot of video, a lot of geolocations from Marinka, from Krasnogorovka, was killed as a result of Ukrainians' counteroffensive operation this morning of 79th Brigade. So the situation is very difficult. Furthermore, the Ukrainians managed to discover and to destroy the Russian artillery system Tulpan that the Russians were using to support the Russian offensive or probably defensive operation in the vicinity of the coal mine. The Ukrainians managed to discover and to destroy that 59th Brigade managed to destroy that artillery system. So for now, the Russians managed to achieve operational success, but now they need somehow to implement and to develop the success. But we see that they faced a lot of barriers, and so let's follow this situation. Now we are moving to Avdiivka. We also got a lot of very interesting updates from this territory during the previous 24 hours. The Russians, after a small operational pause, intensified their activity in this area and start attacking and bombing this settlement from three sides. The first video we got is that the Russians, as a result, as we discussed during the previous waves of attack, the Russians managed to maintain the flanks, and basically they have established fire control over the supply road that leads to Avdiivka. And today we got another video confirmation how the Russians destroyed another barrack or the hangar with Ukrainian armored vehicles inside, and the Russian claims that they destroyed few armored vehicles that were hidden by the Ukrainians in that area. This situation took place on the western flank of Avdiivka. On the southern flank of Avdiivka, we saw today the Russians published a very interesting video how Su-25 were bombing and it's storming aviation, of course. They were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions. They were supporting the Russian offensive forces, and I had a question what kind of forces these two beautiful Su-25 were supporting, and later somewhere at 7 p.m. of the local time we got the first confirmation that the Russians, as a result of counterattack, managed to return their lost positions in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka. The Russians were attacking and returned the bridgeheads on the south of Vysyola, and the most important, the Russians managed to maintain the gray zone and to got as close as possible to the Ukrainian positions, and basically as a result of that attack the Russians returned control over this area. This is another very interesting operation, because for now it's very difficult to understand what is going on there. And when in the beginning of the video I was talking about my not understanding of the situation, and basically I was talking exactly about Avdiivka, about Nivolska, about coal mine, so I don't understand the situation in the vicinity of Donetsk. There are very fierce fightings from both sides, either from the Russians and from the Ukrainians. The positions, some positions on this bridge had changed their owner probably even 2 times a day, or at least few times a week, and this concerns first of all the bridgehead between Avdiivka and Krasnogorovka. But the Russians managed to return control over this territory, but they still haven't managed to develop their attack further. The thing that the Russians managed to achieve today is the same thing that they managed to achieve months ago. But later, as a result of Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Russians were forced to step back. So for now, nothing new. If the Russians, let's say, are able to enter Avdiivka, or at least to enter these positions, like inside of this position, then I could say that yes, the Russians managed not just to return the old, recently lost positions, but also to develop and to enter Avdiivka itself. But for now, we see what we see, and I believe that the clashes will intensify in this area, and there are going to be more and more bloody battles from both sides. Now we are moving to Klishchiivka. We haven't received a lot of updates, at least video confirmations. Yes, either the Russians and the Ukrainians are singing their own songs. The Russians are saying that they are managed to counterattack, to return positions, lost positions. The Ukrainians published the videos of storming process and so on. So as I understand, there are very fierce fightings, very bloody battles, and currently neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are winning this battle. The Russians are losing positions, but they're not losing infantry. The Ukrainians are gaining positions, but their losses are significant on this bridgehead. Few days, I believe, few days left before the end of the battle, and just then we're going to understand the real results of the clashes on this area. The Minister of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings from Marinka to Seversk, including Avdiivka and Klishchiivka and so on, the Ukrainians lost 210 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles and 6 artillery systems. Now we are moving to the Seversk bridgehead. There were very heavy clashes in this area as well. We have already discussed the usage of GDAM guided bomb by the Ukrainian forces in direction of Solidar. From one side, this video is interesting from many points of view. The first one is that the Ukrainians started using these bombs. The second interesting part of this video is that Ukrainians start bombing Solidar. So basically, we can consider this action as the beginning of the battle for Solidar. Currently, the Ukrainians are trying to suppress the Russian defense positions and so on, and this is very interesting, and we need to pay attention, and we need to wait more whether the Ukrainians are going to intensify their actions in direction of this small settlement. And as usually, the 10th Mountain Assault Brigade published us another video of hunting for the Russian soldiers in the vicinity of Berestova. Another very painful part of the combat line for the Russians. For now, they still haven't managed to find a solution how to reduce the Ukrainian activity, and the most important, how to destroy the Ukrainian, let's say, drone asset squads that we can consider as Ukrainian main assets during this special military operation. The Russians published few videos how they were bombing and shelling the Ukrainian positions. On this video, we see that as a result of artillery probably attack, the Russians destroy D-30 howitzer on the Siversk bridgehead. And another video was that the Russians discarded and destroyed the Ukrainians area where they were crossing the Seversk River from Grigorievka to the Kremenная forest. Now we're moving to Tarskoye, to this area. Also, we haven't received much updates, just the video location that we discovered in the morning video about the Russian progress and Russian advances on the northern flank of that salient, how the Russian stormtroopers were attacking and storming the Ukrainian stronghold, small checkpoint. As you can see, they were very close. Those were the Ukrainian positions, and this is the Russian Marines that were attacking this area, and they were bombing and shelling until they managed to reduce this Ukrainian fortification to ruins. The Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of the battle on this bridgehead, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers. As you can see, the level of losses has been reduced in comparison with the previous day. So basically, we see some kind of reduce of intensifying. Probably this situation is connected with small operational pause. Very interesting updates are coming from Karmazinovka and from Kupinsk front lines, and the reports that the Ukrainians during the previous clashes in this area lost 110 soldiers. So as you can see, the level of losses is significant in comparison with the previous days, and the level of losses is higher even than on Liman front line. So basically, the Russians did launch the real counter-offensive or offensive operation in this area, but for now we still haven't received any geolocated updates about any progress of the Russians, but I believe that in a day or two we're going to receive them. Now we are moving to another topics that connected with the special military operation. The Russians created and completed another another series of T-90 tanks and T-72B3M. They managed to increase the production of these types of tanks in more than 3 times. And on this video, we see how the Russians finished another portion of those tanks, and those tanks were sent to the front line. And also the Russians published that even the priest blessed those tanks into their final battle. And also we got today another video confirmation of test of S-70 Hunter Russian drone. As you can see, this is S-70, and behind them we see probably Su-27 or Su-27 as I understand. And as you can see, according to this video, the Russian S-70 Okhotnik is a very big machine. This drone is even bigger than the Russian, let's say, main aircraft, fighting aircraft Su-27. So as you can see and imagine the real sizes of this big machine, and this is going to be a very powerful drone, as I understand, one of the most probably powerful drones in the world, as I understand. And now we are moving to the territory of Belarus. Today we got also a lot of updates from this area. We got that the Belarusian authorities redeployed a number of Wagner forces to the Brest region in this area, and currently the Wagner forces have redeployed their camps in this area. And we got a lot of video and photo confirmations, and we have the most important video confirmation how Wagner's started military exercises with Belarusian special forces. We discussed this redeployment a very long time ago, and if you remember, I told you that Wagner's will be redeployed to the western part of the Belarus, and in case if the Ukrainians if Polish forces will try to cross the border with Ukraine, Wagner's will cross the same border in the western part, and there are going to be real clashes and real battle between Wagner forces and Polish forces for the town by the name of Kovel. At least the video evidence are saying that we are going exactly to this scenario. And I believe that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds they condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.